What's your name?
Aiden.
My name's Hayden. Good to meet you.
You too.
So
Yeah.
you want to just let me know what your thoughts are on abortion?
Yeah. So basically, how I look at it is, right. I'm pro-choice for the most part, but I'll immediately concede that if we should be protecting people who we give rights to, right? And it's just a matter of, for me, at what point we give a fetus rights. And to me, it seems that the point where we stop giving people rights is when they lose their ability to deploy a human conscious experience. So brain death is a good proxy for that, and I think likewise you can apply that to the point of however you want to call it, development, I guess, where the fetus gains the necessary hardware, and that hardware becomes active, and that is used to deploy said conscious experience. So,
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So I guess just in terms of consciousness, just because I want to make sure I represent your position fairly. So it sounds like you would say if someone is unconscious for a surgery but will wake up again, they don't cease their right to life. They still have a right to live. You can't go murder them, right?
Yeah, and a big part of that is that there is a person in the first place to speak of, whereas in the womb, before the hardware is there isn't a person there.
Yeah, so just to clarify though, it's not the immediate capacity to deploy the consciousness though, right?
Yeah, it's ability, but a necessary part of that is
having the parts of the body that are able to deploy consciousness is your argument, right? Okay. So in terms of having the necessary parts of the body to deploy consciousness, I would simply point out, if you have a newborn infant, right, I assume you would say you can't murder the newborn infant, right?
No, definitely not.
Thank you. Now, if we had, let's say, what'd you just eat by chance, if I may ask?
Chicken and rice.
Chicken and rice. Okay, thank you. Do you eat pork? I'm assuming though,
Yeah.
right? Okay. Yeah. So if we had a pig, an adult pig, it has higher levels of rational thought, higher levels of consciousness, higher levels of memory than a newborn infant does. And there's actually some people who say, well, since we kill pigs, right, for food or for other reasons, we should actually be able to kill newborn infants up to a certain point. There are some people who make that argument. You're not making that argument, of course. Obviously, I recognize that. But if we're going to say that having the capacity to deploy consciousness or having the body parts that allow you to deploy consciousness is what makes someone valuable. But then we look at pigs who are actually able to deploy far more consciousness than a newborn infant is. In order to be consistent, wouldn't we also have to go vegan or start protecting the pigs' lives just like we do humans?
If that follows, I agree. But I think there's something special and unique about specifically the human conscious experience.
That's a great point.
Yeah, over animals.
Yeah, here's what I'd say is the problem with that, though. I'd say that unique aspect of the human conscious experience, that doesn't come into play until someone's about past 3 years old. Because up until someone's about 3 years old, they're really no more conscious. They have no more levels of rational thought, no more levels of memory than do many animals that we kill all the time, like pigs, like rats, things like that, right? So the problem is, if we're talking about humans having this unique ability to deploy consciousness that's different from other animals, that doesn't come into play later. But if we're going to be consistent with that, then we'd actually have to say it's okay to kill the newborns. Otherwise, I guess, here's what you could say. You could say, okay, humans, this ability doesn't come into play until someone's about 3 years old or later, but we shouldn't kill the newborns because they're going to have the ability to deploy that unique level of consciousness in the future. But the problem is, if that's the argument, that applies from fertilization forward. You see the problem?
I understand what you're saying. Are you saying that before, and correct me if I'm wrong, I don't want to misrepresent you.
No worries.
Are you saying that before a baby is 3 years old, they are not conscious?
No, I'm saying they are conscious. But what I'm pointing out is that consciousness isn't like a light switch. It's not like on and off.
You're arguing for a gradient kind of deal.
Yeah, consciousness exists on a spectrum, right? So for example, a newborn infant is going to have less levels of rational thought and all the things we consider consciousness. Consciousness is kind of an umbrella term. It encompasses things like rational thought, memory, things like that, right? Because you can go in and out of degrees of consciousness, right? You can be very conscious at one point and then minimally conscious at another, like someone who's in a persistent vegetative state. Well, I guess they might be technically unconscious, but they do exhibit higher levels of brain activity in response to hearing their brain and things like that. But the big problem is, if we look at consciousness on a spectrum, which I think we have to because it's not like a light switch, right? We see that pigs are far more conscious until a kid's about 3. That's when they kind of reach like the same level of consciousness.
What are you using to measure consciousness?
Things like rational thought, things like memory, things like, I'd say rational thought's pretty much a big aspect, but I think you would even agree with me though that if we look at a pig who's capable of like playing video games and like, actually like performing well on them compared to just random control trials, we know a newborn can't do that, right? And so if we look at that, I think it's pretty obvious to everyone that a pig ultimately does have far more conscious ability, things like rational thought, than a newborn.
I'm not aware of any of that, so
Okay,
I'll have to take your word for it.
Okay, let me just ask you this then. This might help me understand your position better. What do you think a newborn has that, in terms of conscious thought, that is unique compared to something like an adult pig?
No, I'm not.
It's okay if you don't have an answer right now.
I'm not aware of, like, I can give you aspects of what I think, like, characterizes a human conscious experience, which is going to be things like ability to understand language on a higher degree, and that's probably a really big one. Being able to, like, map like physical things to abstract concepts, that's to a higher degree than just Pavlovian responses, you know.
Yep.
I don't know what that looks like in pigs, so I can't. I'm not going to be able to argue that, but that's probably a very big one.
Yeah, those are great points, but I would just say I don't think that those things come into play until someone's far past the newborn stage. I think those things don't really come into play until they're probably closer to 3 years old. So I just say that's something maybe we both should look up after this.
Yeah, I will look into that for sure.
Just to see at what point does that come in play, because the problem is if that doesn't come into play until 3 years old or something like that, then to be consistent in your position, you'd have to be okay with, the killing of infants, things like that.
If I take that to be true.
Yeah,
sure.
that's why I said if. Yep. So I think that's something that maybe, you can look into. Maybe I'll look up that after this. Yeah. But from what I understand, pigs are about, a child reaches the same level of consciousness, things like rational thought, memory. Probably I'd assume things like language. Language might come in a little bit earlier, I think, than 3, but I don't see any of the things that you mentioned being exhibited in a child before 1 year old, I don't think. Do you?
Okay.
I think maybe language is the only one I would say.
Yeah, definitely language, and I think that's a huge one. Right?
But I would also say I think there are probably other animals that are probably keen to language as well, similar to a newborn.
Could you give examples of that?
Yeah, I would say. I mean, I'd have to do some more research as well. So I'm willing to acknowledge that. But I would assume that something like a dolphin or something like that would probably be able to understand language, an adult dolphin, to a similar degree, maybe as someone who's like 3 months old outside of the womb or something like that. I could be wrong on that, but I'm willing to research that from my position.
Yeah, sure. What generally is your position on abortion?
Yeah, let me just real quick before I get to that, I do want to mention one more thing on your position.
Sure, absolutely.
So if you say that consciousness is what makes humans valuable or have a right to life, one of the flaws I think in that I just encourage you to consider is, if we want all human beings to have equal rights and consider them to be equally valuable, then I think we would need something that all human beings have equally. And since we don't all have the same levels of consciousness all the time, I think we would end up seeing, if we were to hold your position, that human beings are going up and down in terms of their value, or in terms of, I guess, their not necessarily the right to live, because I know your position isn't that it varies. It's more just like, okay, do they have the body parts to deploy the consciousness? But I just think if we're going to have equal human rights and say everyone's equally valuable, that it can't be based on something that is on a spectrum, right?
Mm-hmm. Do you mean, are you pointing to that spectrum just
of consciousness? Yeah. Right. Because you're going to have some people who are way more keen on terms of things like language, things like abstract thought, things like that. And I wouldn't say they're more valuable than people who have lower level abilities in terms of developing or understanding language or coming up with abstract concepts and things like that.
Okay.
But I'm happy to explain my position now.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, yeah, so my position is simply human beings are made in the image of God. We're made in the image of God from fertilization forward. God commands us not to murder. Abortion is the unjustified taking of human life, which God commands us murder. He says that the government is supposed to serve him, and that means they need to obey his law, and his law says that abortion is murder. So I just think we need to implement that in law, obey God.
Okay, I understand what you're saying. Yep. I'm not a Christian.
Yeah, no worries.
So is there a secular argument that you have for this? Because we're not going to be able to resolve.
That's a great question. But here's where I would actually go with that. I would actually argue, and this is a little bit different from abortion, but I'd make the argument that secularism can't justify any moral absolutes, and therefore it should be basically just ignored as far as a moral system. Because here'd be the argument that I would make for why God is required for a moral absolute. Is it okay if I make that argument?
Sure, absolutely.
Okay, I would say, would you agree with me that moral judgments are statements? For example, it is better to love your neighbor than hate your neighbor. That's a statement, right?
Yeah, but...
Or it is wrong to rape a woman.
Sure, but I'm not bought into the objectivity of that, of either of those.
Okay, you don't have to believe the objectivity, but just take it as would you agree?
Sure, I agree with the premise.
Moral judgments are statements. Okay. Would you also say moral judgments are abstractions, or in other words, mental constructions separate from the physical thing they represent? So when I say it is wrong to rape a woman, that is a mental construction separate from the actual physical event of a man raping a woman, right?
Sure.
It's an abstract concept of what would happen there. Okay, so if moral judgments are statements and they're abstractions, then in order for us to have an absolute unchanging view of morality that has existed eternally, we'd have to have an eternal unchanging mind, because moral judgments require statements and abstractions require minds. You can't have statements and abstractions if there's no minds.
Why do we need an unchanging objective morality? Why? Yeah. What is?
Yeah, and it's a good question, because I know that's your position, is that it's not objective, right? Morality isn't objective. Okay, so here's the thing, right? If we're going to impose, or I guess let's just take the example of consciousness, right? You say that having the body parts to deploy consciousness is what makes humans valuable. Mm-hmm. And here's the problem with that, though. If I have, are you an atheist, just to clarify? Yeah. Okay, so if I have you, an atheist, saying that's what provides humans value, right here on my left, and if I have another atheist on my right who's saying, no, it's not that, it's actually having white skin that provides humans value. Mm-hmm. How are we supposed to know who to listen to? You could say, well, whatever the majority of people think, but the problem with that is, well, okay, what happened then in the Holocaust when the majority of people thought it was okay to kill Jews? Or what happened in the 1800s when in America people thought it was okay to kidnap and enslave black people, right? So if we don't have an absolute objective standard of morality, then all we really have is a fight for might, right? Might makes right. Whoever has the most power is able to impose their view of morality on the minority. And so that's what I would say is the problem, is if we're going to have law, it better be objective and absolute, because if it's not, then all it is just whoever has power imposing their will on the weaker and defenseless people. Yeah,
respectfully, that is what it is with God too, right? An objective Christian morality system is essentially subjective might makes right morality, except the only opinion that matters is God's, right?
Well, I wouldn't necessarily say that it might make right in a sense, but also not in a sense, right? When I would say, like, I want to obey God, or I think our government should obey God, mm-hmm. right? That's because God is the absolute standard of goodness. So sure, it's ultimately like whatever He says is good, of course.
Why is He the absolute standard of goodness?
Because He created us, He gave us all the things around us for which we should be thankful for.
His might, right?
We shouldn't obey Him just because there's punishment ahead of us. That's part of it. Jesus Himself says, "Fear not the one who can destroy body, but mm-hmm. the one who can throw both body and soul into hell." But it also says in Romans 1 that people who suppress the truth, some people suppress it through atheism, some people through false religions like Islam, Mormonism, but it says that they refuse to give thanks in Romans 1, and so they suppress the truth. Give thanks for everything around us. So it's not just that we should obey Him because there's judgment ahead of us if we don't. It's also that we should obey Him because we should be thankful for all the many blessings He's given us. Every single breath that we take, our mother's taking care of us, even if someone doesn't have a mother who took care of them, all the wonderful creation around us. So it's not just fear of judgment ahead of us for why we should obey God. It's out of thankfulness, and that's how He created us, to glorify Him.
I'm sorry, that was a lot. Could you summarize that succinctly?
Yeah, so I would say, on one level, you're right, that it is sort of might makes right in a sense, mm-hmm. and that we should have appropriate fear of the judgment ahead of us if we don't obey. But what I want to point to is, so I think you agreed, I think, that in your view it is might makes right, ultimately. And if in like your view where God doesn't exist. This is what takes place.
I think that could be argued. I'm not necessarily opposed to that. I think there are different, like, mm-hmm. Moral, whatever you call them, systems that you can use. And I think there are different ones that can be used to analyze different circumstances and stuff. There isn't a good, like, universal moral system that we can use, because circumstances change, and that's what's so hard about ethics, is that, when you're trying to solve an ethical dilemma, it's hard to bite the bullet without all the context, right? And that's why there are so many different moral systems and so much debate about it. But you can, just because you don't have one moral system doesn't make all of them worthless,
Well, one thing that I would just say in terms of, like, if morality is relative, or if there's no objective absolute standards, I simply don't believe that anyone actually deep down believes that. And I don't mean that offensively, because I know that there are people who profess that, right? They say, mm-hmm. no, I actually do believe that there's no objective morality. But I think that if a woman is raped, or if a man is beaten or has his child beaten in front of him, I think deep down he knows, no, that's always going to be wrong. It was always wrong, and will forever be always wrong. I don't think anyone actually believes, no, it could have been wrong today, but it could be right tomorrow.
Are you familiar with ethical emotivism?
No, feel free to explain it.
Essentially, it's just saying that moral statements are just expressions of, like, an emotion, emotivism, right? So, when we say something like murder is wrong, what we are saying there is an expression of, like, boo murder, mm-hmm. essentially. And I think that can largely explain the degree of universality of a lot of like what we deem as crimes, like murder and rape and stuff, most people are going to feel bad about that, and that's expressed in the moral statement, which is, boo murder, right?
But here's where I think the problem is with that, though, right? If we take as our belief evolution, that we just evolved from bacteria to fish to us, that we just exist in a material world where there's no immaterial things like God or like the laws of logic, things like that. If we just assume that, okay, then in your brain, right? In the mechanical reaction, chemical reaction going on in your brain is saying, no, rape is wrong, murder is wrong. And then on my right, I have someone who's saying, no, the chemical reaction in my brain is saying that raping a woman is a good, moral, happy thing. But the problem is, now there's two chemical reactions, and now we don't know which one is right? Now, most people will assume I'm the mentally healthy one because I agree with most people around me. But why isn't the person who's pro-rape and pro-murder the mentally healthy one? We don't know. But yet people want to impose that morality and law, even though they don't know.
Well, when it comes to health, right? Health is defined as, how people are supposed to function, right?
Yeah, but who says that the majority are supposed to function? Why isn't it that the way that he's functioning is how everyone else needs to get in line with? Why does he need to get in line with you guys? You
could generalize this to all health, right? Like, if my friend has like several heart attacks a year or whatever, it's like, who are we to say, that a heart isn't supposed to be like that or that's a bad thing? Like, there are certain standards that we can, see in like fields of psychology. I'm not a psychologist, but in fields of psychology where it's like, it seems to be that most people function within this range, and that seems to be the optimal range for maximizing well-being or something akin to that. Yeah.
I want you to think about something though. What if 95% of people had heart attacks and were dead before the age of 15, but then 10% of people actually weren't having heart attacks and were living till they were 85? Even though the majority of people have that condition where they're getting heart attacks early, I think it'd be pretty obvious to everyone that no, the actual healthy one is the minority in this case, right?
If we evolved in a way such that we were having heart attacks, or the vast majority of people were having heart attacks at 15 years old, right? I think society would look at the people that live longer as the people with the condition. Now, whether that is necessarily like suboptimal is up for debate, but that would be the abnormality, right?
So just clarify, you think it'd be up for debate whether living longer is what's healthy?
Well, I mean, we would have built our entire society upon people that live 15 years old, right? So all of our system, people, I don't know, are already, even when they live so long, suffer from, old people have very high rates of mental illness, right? Depression and all that. Not even like Alzheimer's and whatever. And I think the societal implications of that probably are worth taking into account. We wouldn't have nearly as much experience with that. And I don't know.
I guess just one thing to leave you with, because I don't want to take up too much of your time, but
I can go however long you want.
Yeah. One thing I just want you to do tonight is read through Romans 1, because what it says is that everyone knows that God exists, but that they suppress their truth. Like I said earlier, some people suppress it through atheism, some people through false religion like Islam, Mormonism, things like that. But the reason that I want you to read through it is because I don't think that you actually live like the worldview that you profess. Okay. I think that if you had, I don't know how old your mother is, but if you had your mother, let's just say she's 45, just for the sake of the argument. You don't got to say her actual age, but hopefully your mother's not dead, I assume.
No, she's not.
Okay, all right, yeah. Let's say your mother's like 45. I don't think that you actually believe that if you lived in a society where most people died of heart attacks by age 15, that would be better than her living to 45. I don't think that you actually believe that deep down, even though that might be what you profess.
Well, the only reason we think that that's bad is because that's not a normal thing right now, right?
But I disagree. I think even if it was the normal thing, I think you would still have deep down in your heart, because God's law is written on your heart and He made it in His image. I think you would still deep down know that it's still better for your mother to live to 45, and that continuing to live is actually better than dying at 15.
Okay, I don't think that that's a knowable thing, but
real quick, do you think we can know things for certain?
Yeah, I mean, it's not. I don't think we could know for sure, like how a society would feel about that in that society that's built upon people living till they're 15, right? We have no, our entire world is people living till they're 70, that's very far outside of like our realm of knowing, I suppose.
Okay. Yeah. Well, hey, I left you with something to consider or read, Romans 1, and also like the the pig consciousness thing as far as
Yeah,
what
absolutely.
levels? Anything you want to leave me to read tonight or to think about?
Actually, I'm noticing the camera, and this isn't something necessary to leave you with, but where can I assume you're going to
I'm happy to give that to you after, but I do want to just give you the chance to leave me with something that you think I need to research or something I should read up on.
I don't know. I feel like not really.
Okay.
Right?
In all fairness,
Really,
I probably should read up on the consciousness, rational thought thing as well.
Yeah, probably, but yeah. I don't know.
Well, hey, it was a great conversation.
Yeah.
Thank you for. I want to take a second and apologize to this man for interrupting him as much as I did during our conversation. I'd love to have another conversation with him if he wants to stop by next time I'm on campus, and I really appreciate him taking the time to sit down and discuss the issue with me.